I lay pinned in the twisted metal of what used to be my sedan, the heavy taste of copper pooling in my mouth. The freezing rain hammered against the shattered windshield, but the cold didn't register. What kept my eyes open was the glowing screen of my cracked phone, resting sideways on the dashboard. It displayed an unread email that was supposed to change my family's life forever. $12 million. That was the number. But as the sirens wailed in the agonizing distance, I had no idea that the most devastating collision of the night wasn't with the delivery truck that had just T-boned me. The real crash was waiting for me at the hospital, wearing my husband's face. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. My name is Maya, I am 28 years old, and up until August of 2025, I truly believed that a successful marriage was built entirely on quiet sacrifices. My world was incredibly small, defined by the four walls of our modest two-bedroom apartment in the suburbs and the erratic sleeping schedule of my 4-year-old son, Leo. Leo was my anchor. He had these big, inquisitive brown eyes that soaked up the world like a sponge, and a laugh that could pull me out of the darkest moods. Every morning started the same way. At 5:30 a.m., before the sun even thought about rising, I was up mashing bananas into oatmeal and packing superhero-themed lunchboxes. By 8 a.m., after dropping Leo off at a daycare we could barely afford, I would sit down at our cramped kitchen table. That table was my office. I didn't wear tailored suits or carry a leather briefcase. My uniform consisted of oversized college sweatpants, a messy bun, and a permanent stain of lukewarm coffee on my sleeve. I was a freelance software developer by day to keep the lights on, but by night, I was building a dream. I called it Leo's World. It was an early education app I had coded entirely from scratch, designed specifically for children with minor speech and learning delays, something Leo had struggled with early on. I poured every ounce of a mother's fierce love into those lines of code. When the house finally went quiet at 9 p.m., I would put on my noise-canceling headphones, crack open an energy drink, and type until my vision blurred, often falling asleep right there on the keyboard. My husband, Nathan, lived in a completely different reality. Nathan was 30 years old, but he carried himself like a Silicon Valley billionaire who just hadn't received his check yet. He was the CEO of his own tech startup, a data analytics firm that, as far as I could tell, analyzed nothing but our rapidly depleting joint savings account. He was always impeccably groomed, smelling of expensive cedarwood cologne, his crisp button-down shirts ironed to perfection. While I was counting pennies at the grocery store, checking to see if we could afford the name brand cereal for Leo, Nathan was out networking. I remember a Tuesday evening in early August. I was sitting on the living room rug, helping Leo snap together some plastic building blocks, completely exhausted. The front door swung open and Nathan breezed in, checking his smartwatch. He didn't bend down to hug his son. He walked straight to the hall mirror to adjust his tie. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice carrying that fast-paced corporate edge he always used when he wanted something. "I need you to float me about $1,500 by tomorrow morning. We're burning through cash at the office and the runway is getting incredibly short." I looked up, a plastic block pausing in my hand. "Nathan, $1,500? The mortgage is due on Friday. I just took an advance on a freelance contract so we wouldn't bounce the daycare check." He sighed, rolling his eyes as if I were a child who didn't understand basic math. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Maya, it's called optics, okay? You gotta spend money to make money. We're pitching to a massive angel investor tomorrow night over stakes. I can't show up looking like a scrub. Chloe said if we don't lock this guy down, the startup is toast." Chloe. Her name always seemed to hover in the air of our apartment like a bad smell. Chloe was a 27-year-old shark with a business degree, serving as Nathan's VP of Investor Relations. Whenever I saw her at company holiday parties, she looked me up and down with a thinly veiled smirk, as if my status as a stay-at-home mom and freelance coder was some sort of contagious disease. "Why can't Chloe use the company card?" I asked, keeping my voice level so Leo wouldn't hear the tension. "Because the company card is maxed," Nathan snapped, his patience instantly evaporating. "Look, you don't get the hustle. You sit around all day playing on your laptop in yoga pants. You have no idea the kind of pressure I'm under. Just transfer the cash. It's sweat equity. When we go public, you won't have to worry about the grocery bill ever again." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed his keys off the counter. "I gotta run. Grabbing drinks with the dev team to strategize. Don't wait up." The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Leo tugged on my sleeve, holding up a crooked tower of red and blue blocks. Look, Mommy, I built a castle. I forced a wide smile, pulling him into my lap and burying my face in his soft hair. It's a beautiful castle, baby, the strongest one I've ever seen. I transferred the money that night, leaving exactly $42 in my personal checking account. I told myself it was for our future. I told myself that marriage was a partnership. I had no idea I was just funding the very people who were actively plotting my ruin. 3 weeks later, everything shattered. It was late August, a typical, humid, oppressive Tuesday afternoon. Leo was at daycare and I was sitting at the kitchen table staring blankly at my laptop screen. My eyes were burning from staring at lines of Python code for 6 hours straight. I clicked over to my email inbox, expecting the usual spam or a revision request from a freelance client. Instead, sitting right at the top, bold and unread, was an email from the acquisitions department of a monolithic tech corporation based in Silicon Valley. I almost deleted it, assuming it was a phishing scam, but the subject line caught my breath. Formal acquisition offer, Leo's World app. My hands began to tremble. I clicked the email open. The legal jargon was dense, but my eyes skipped down the paragraphs until they locked onto a bolded line of text near the bottom. Propose a full buyout of intellectual property, source code, and user database for a total cash compensation of $12 million US. $12 million. I stopped breathing. The hum of the refrigerator in the background suddenly sounded like a roaring jet engine. I read the number again. I counted the zeros, my finger literally tracing the glass of the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my God, I whispered to the empty room. I pushed my chair back so violently it crashed to the floor. I stood up, pressing my hands to my mouth, tears instantly pricking the corners of my eyes. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was unfathomable. It was the validation. The countless sleepless nights, the cold coffee, the moments I felt completely invisible while Nathan paraded around in his custom suits, it was all worth it. I had built something brilliant. I had secured Leo's future forever. He would go to any college he wanted. We could buy a house with a backyard big enough for a swing set. I needed to tell Nathan. I grabbed my phone from the counter with shaking hands and dialed his number. It rang 3 times before it clicked over to his voicemail. Hey, you've reached Nathan. I'm busy disrupting the industry. Leave a message. I hung up and texted him. Nathan, pick up the phone. I have the most insane news. Please call me back right now. I couldn't sit still. The energy buzzing through my veins was too frantic. I looked at the clock. It was 4:15 p.m. I decided I would drive to his office building downtown, surprise him, and tell him face to face. Then we would go pick up Leo together and celebrate. I threw on a raincoat. The sky outside had turned a bruised, angry purple, threatening a late summer storm, grabbed my keys, and bolted out the door. By the time I merged onto the highway, the heavens had opened up. It wasn't just rain, it was a torrential downpour. The windshield wipers were on their highest setting, frantically slapping back and forth, but visibility was practically zero. The sky was dark as midnight, lit only by the red blur of taillights ahead of me. I kept my phone in the cup holder. It buzzed. It was a text from Nathan. I stopped at a red light and glanced down. Can't talk. In a loud bar with Chloe prepping for a pitch. Stop blowing up my phone. I need bandwidth for this. Tell me later. A small sting of rejection hit my chest, but I brushed it off. Just wait until you see the numbers, Nathan, I thought, smiling to myself. You're never going to have to beg an investor for a dime ever again. The light turned green. I pressed the gas pedal, my sedan moving forward into the massive intersection. The rain was deafening, drumming a relentless beat on the roof of the car. I never saw the truck. Later, the police would tell me that a commercial delivery driver, exhausted and running behind schedule, had hydroplaned while trying to beat a yellow light. He was going 50 miles an hour when he ran the red. All I remember is a sudden, blinding flash of high beams exploding into my peripheral vision from the left side. There was no time to brake. There was no time to scream. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating inside my skull. The force of the collision threw my car across the wet pavement like a discarded toy. The driver's side door crumpled inward, a violent tidal wave of steel and shattered glass exploding into my body. The airbag deployed with a punch that broke my nose instantly, filling the cabin with the bitter, chalky smell of gunpowder. The world spun in a terrifying kaleidoscope of gray sky, black asphalt, and flashing lights as the car rolled twice before finally slamming roof first into a concrete traffic barrier. Then, everything stopped. A heavy, ringing silence settled over me, broken only by the hiss of the radiator and the steady, merciless patter of the rain. I was hanging upside down, suspended by the seatbelt biting fiercely into my collarbone. I tried to gasp for air, but my lungs refused to expand. I tried to move my legs. Nothing happened. There was no pain at first, just an absolute, terrifying numbness from my waist down. It felt as though my lower half had simply been erased from existence. Blood dripped steadily from my forehead, stinging my eyes. I blinked through the red haze. Down below me, on what was now the roof of the car, my phone lay illuminated among the sparkling shards of safety glass. It was still open to the email. 12 million US dollars. I reached a trembling, blood-soaked hand toward it, my fingers brushing the edge of the cracked screen. I needed to call Leo's daycare. I needed to tell someone to pick up my son. Leo, I croaked, the sound nothing more than a wet whisper. The edges of my vision began to darken, a thick black tunnel closing in from all sides. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, piercing the sound of the rain, but it felt like it was happening to someone else, in another universe. As my eyes rolled back and the darkness finally pulled me under, my last thought wasn't about the millions of dollars. It was a desperate, burning prayer that Nathan would answer his phone, that he would rush to the hospital, and that he would hold my hand and tell me everything was going to be all right. I didn't know that the man I was praying for was about to become my executioner. The first thing that registered was the smell. It wasn't the comforting scent of Leo's baby shampoo or the familiar aroma of dark roast coffee in my kitchen. It was the sharp, sterile stench of bleach, iodine, and latex. Then came the sound. A steady, rhythmic beep. Beep. Beep that seemed to echo directly inside my skull. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they had been glued shut. When I finally managed to pry them open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit stabbed at my retinas. I let out a dry, raspy groan. My throat felt like it was coated in crushed glass. I tried to shift my weight, to sit up and figure out where I was, but my body refused to obey. A searing, blinding agony shot up from my legs, radiating through my spine and exploding in my chest. It was a pain so profound, so absolute, that it stole the breath right out of my lungs. I looked down through the fog of my blurred vision. Both of my legs, from the mid-thigh down to my toes, were encased in thick, heavy, yellowish-white plaster. They felt like dead weights, 2 pillars of concrete pinning me to the mattress. "Mrs. Vance? Try not to move." A nurse stepped into my line of sight. She looked exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled, holding a digital tablet. She checked my IV drip before looking down at me with a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Where?" I croaked, the word tearing at my vocal cords. "Where is my son? Leo?" "Your son is safe, Mrs. Vance. The police contacted your daycare. He's fine," she said softly, adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. "You've been in and out of consciousness for nearly 2 days. You were in a severe motor vehicle collision." Tears of pure relief leaked from the corners of my eyes, tracking through the dried blood and iodine still crusted on my cheeks. Leo was safe. That was all that mattered. "My legs," I whispered, the panic starting to bubble up as the numbness gave way to a throbbing, relentless fire. "I can't feel them moving." The nurse sighed, her expression tightening. She pulled up a chair and sat next to the bed. "You suffered bilateral comminuted fractures in your femurs and tibias. Essentially, the bones in your lower legs were crushed. We stabilized you, but..." She hesitated, glancing at the doorway before looking back at me. "But what?" I demanded, my heart monitor picking up its pace, the beep, beep, beep turning into a frantic flutter. The orthopedic surgeon recommended an immediate reconstructive surgery. It involves inserting titanium rods and pinning the bone fragments back together. It's a specialized, invasive procedure, but it yields a very high success rate for regaining full mobility. "So why am I in plaster?" I asked, staring at the archaic, heavy cast weighing me down. The nurse looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Your husband, Nathan, was here yesterday when you were unresponsive. As your next of kin, he had to make the medical proxy decisions. The titanium reconstructive surgery is considered out-of-network for your current insurance tier. The out-of-pocket cost is roughly $50,000. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The room started to spin. "He declined it," she said quietly, confirming my nightmare. "He opted for the standard, fully covered external reduction and casting. I need to be completely honest with you, Maya. Without that titanium framework, the bones will not heal correctly. The chances of you walking without a walker or a wheelchair for the rest of your life are less than 20%. I stared at her, the words ringing in my ears like a death sentence. Wheelchair, rest of your life. Nathan had condemned me to a lifetime of disability to save 50 grand. The man who wore $3,000 tailored suits and blew thousands on networking dinners had looked at my shattered body and decided my ability to walk, my ability to run after our 4-year-old son in the park, simply wasn't worth the hit to his bank account. Before I could process the magnitude of that betrayal, a sharp, familiar sound echoed from the hallway outside my slightly ajar door. The click-clack of expensive stilettos hitting the linoleum floor. "Give me a minute," I heard Nathan's voice say. It didn't sound frantic or grief-stricken. It sounded annoyed. The nurse gave me a pitying look, patted my shoulder, and slipped out of the room, leaving the door cracked open just an inch. Through that narrow slit, I could hear them clearly. "This is a disaster, Nate," a woman's voice hissed. It was Chloe. I would recognize that condescending, vocal fry tone anywhere. The angel investor backed out this morning. He saw the Q3 burn rate and got spooked. We are completely out of runway. If we don't inject capital into the startup by Friday, payroll bounces and the servers get shut down. "Keep your voice down," Nathan snapped. "I know. You think I don't know? I just had to sign off on wrapping my wife's legs in cheap drywall because I literally couldn't clear a 50 grand hold on my credit cards." "So what's the pivot?" Chloe demanded, her tone shifting from panicked to predatory. "We need liquidity, and we need it yesterday. You told me she was working on some kitty app. Does it have any value?" My breath hitched in my throat. I lay perfectly still, ignoring the screaming agony in my legs, straining to hear every word. "Leo's World," Nathan scoffed. "Yeah, she codes it in the kitchen, but here's the thing. I saw an email on her laptop last week from a tech recruiter. They were sniffing around it. It might be worth a few $100 grand to the right buyer. Maybe enough to float us through Q4. "A few $100 grand? Chloe's voice perked up, dripping with sudden greed. "Nate, you're her husband. It's marital property. Sell it. Liquidate the IP and dump the cash into our holding account." "I can't just sell it, Chloe. The copyright is solely in her name. She has to sign off on the transfer of IP, and Maya is stubborn. She thinks that app is her little baby." "And she's currently heavily medicated and strapped to a bed, Nathan," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a chilling, conspiratorial whisper. "The doctor said she hit her head, right? Concussion? Traumatic brain injury?" "Yeah, a minor concussion. Why?" "Leverage it," Chloe urged, the ice in her voice making my blood run cold. "Get her to sign a durable power of attorney. Tell her it's a standard medical proxy so you can handle the hospital billing and deal with her insurance while she recovers. Once you have her signature on a POA, you control her assets. You declare her temporarily mentally incompetent due to the head trauma. You sell the app and we save the company. By the time she's out of that cast and realizes what happened, the money will be legally integrated into the startup's corporate structure. She won't be able to touch it." There was a long, heavy pause in the hallway. I waited for my husband, the man I had vowed to love in sickness and in health, the father of my child, to tell her she was insane. I waited for him to defend me. Instead, I heard him exhale a long breath. "Do you have the paperwork?" "Drafted it this morning," Chloe said smoothly. "Standard boilerplate. I highlighted the signature line. Go in there, play the concerned husband, and get the ink on the paper. I'll wait by the elevators." I closed my eyes as hot, silent tears streamed down my face, soaking into the thin hospital pillow. They weren't just taking my legs. They were planning to steal my life's work. They were going to rob Leo of his future to feed a failing, bankrupt vanity project. The door creaked open. I quickly wiped my eyes with the back of my bruised hand and let my head loll to the side, relaxing my facial muscles to look as weak and disoriented as possible. I let the steady beep of the heart monitor dictate my breathing. "Maya?" Nathan's voice was soft, dripping with a manufactured tenderness that made my stomach churn. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking as if the light was too bright. He stood by the bed, wearing a pristine navy blue blazer over a crisp white shirt. Not a single wrinkle, not a single stain. He looked like he was about to step into a boardroom, not an ICU. "Hey," he whispered, reaching out to stroke my forehead. His skin felt like a snake's under my touch. "Oh, babe, you look... I'm so sorry. I came as soon as the police called." Liar, I thought. You were sitting in a bar with Chloe. "Nathan?" I managed to whisper, letting my voice crack perfectly. My legs. It hurts so much. His eyes darted away from mine, unable to meet my gaze for more than a second. Guilt, or maybe just the discomfort of looking at a broken thing he didn't want to fix. I know, babe. The doctor said it was a horrible crash, but you're safe now. I'm taking care of everything, he said, pulling a clipboard out from behind his back. Listen, I don't want to overwhelm you, but the hospital administration is being incredibly aggressive. They need some forms signed for the insurance billing, otherwise they're threatening to move you out of the ICU to a public ward. He held the clipboard up. I let my eyes unfocus, staring blankly at the dense legal text. Right at the top, in capitalized letters, it didn't say medical proxy. It said durable power of attorney and full financial proxy. He was really doing it. He was looking me in the eye and handing me the knife to slit my own throat. My head is spinning, Nathan, I slurred slightly, leaning into the role of the concussed, helpless wife. I can't read that. You don't need to read it, sweetie. It's just red tape, he cooed, uncapping a sleek black pen and pressing it into my trembling fingers. Just sign right here on the yellow line. I'll handle the insurance adjusters. You just focus on resting. I looked at the pen in my hand. For a split second, a surge of pure, violent rage threatened to consume me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stab the pen into his tailored suit, but anger wouldn't save my app. Anger wouldn't save Leo. I needed to be smarter. I needed to play his game, but I was going to rig the board. I let my hand shake violently. Okay, I whispered. I pressed the pen to the paper, but I didn't sign Maya A. Vance. I purposefully tightened my grip, restricting the movement of my wrist, and scribbled a jagged, loopy mess that looked like a child's drawing. I intentionally swapped my middle initial, writing a massive, illegible E instead of an A, and misspelled my own last name, dropping the C entirely. It was a signature done under extreme medical duress, under the influence of heavy narcotics, and it was demonstrably fake. Any junior forensic handwriting expert would throw it out of court in 5 seconds. But Nathan, eager and impatient, didn't look closely. He slid the clipboard out from under my hand the second the ink lifted from the page. Perfect. You did great, babe, he smiled, a genuine grin of relief washing over his face. He had his prize. I'm going to run this down to administration right now so they don't bother you again. Get some sleep. I'll be back later tonight, okay? He leaned down and kissed my forehead. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to recoil from his touch. Love you, he whispered. Bye, I breathed out. He turned on his heel and walked out the door, his pace brisk, almost celebratory. The moment the door clicked shut, the facade dropped. The weak, concussed housewife vanished. The cold, hard reality of my situation crystallized in my mind. Nathan thought I was a broken bird, permanently grounded. He didn't know that just hours before the crash, the email I had read wasn't an offer for a few $100,000. It was an offer for $12 million. I wasn't the prey. I was the predator with a loaded weapon he didn't even know existed. I looked over at the bedside table. My personal belongings had been placed in a clear plastic hospital bag. My phone was inside, the screen completely shattered into a spider web of glass, but the notification light was still blinking a faint, steady green. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the shooting pain in my collarbone, and stretched my arm out. My fingers brushed the plastic bag. I hooked it and dragged it onto the bed. I fumbled with the zipper, pulling the ruined phone out. Miraculously, the touchscreen still responded beneath the jagged cracks. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my mother. I swiped open my contacts and scrolled down to a number I had saved 2 years ago, back when I first incorporated Leo's World as an LLC to protect my intellectual property. David Sterling, corporate attorney, mergers and acquisitions. He was ruthless, brilliant, and expensive. He was exactly the kind of monster I needed on my side to fight the monsters in my own home. I pressed the call button and brought the cracked glass to my ear, wincing as a shard scratched my cheek. It rang twice before a deep baritone voice answered, crisp and alert despite it being the middle of the workday. Sterling Law, David speaking. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of bleach and my own dried blood. David, it's Maya Vance. My voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of fear. I am currently sitting in a bed at Memorial Hospital with 2 broken legs. My husband is actively trying to declare me mentally incompetent to seize my intellectual property and sell it to cover his corporate fraud. There was a fraction of a second of silence on the line. David didn't gasp. He didn't ask if I was okay. He was a professional. He processed the variables instantly. "Did you sign anything?" David asked, his tone dropping into a serious, calculated octave. "A durable power of attorney 10 minutes ago. But I forged my own signature under the influence of IV painkillers. It's easily contestable." "Smart girl," David muttered, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. "What's the play, Maya? Do you want me to file a temporary restraining order and block the POA?" "No," I said, staring at the ceiling tiles above me, mapping out the architecture of my revenge. "Let him think he won. Let him think I'm helpless. I received a formal acquisition offer for the app this afternoon from Silicon Valley, $12 million cash buyout." The typing on David's end stopped dead. $12 million, he repeated, a hint of genuine respect coloring his voice. "And Nathan doesn't know the valuation? He thinks it's worth pocket change. He thinks I'm worth nothing." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I need you to bring the acquisition contracts to this hospital room immediately. We close the deal today, strictly in my name, bypassing the marital asset clause due to prior LLC structuring." "And David?" "Yes, Maya?" "When the cash hits my private account, I need you to find me the best orthopedic surgeon in the country. Because when I walk into the courtroom to take my son away from him, I am going to do it in 4-inch heels." Less than 2 hours after I hung up that cracked, blood-stained phone, the heavy wooden door of my ICU room eased open. It wasn't a nurse, and it certainly wasn't my husband. David Sterling slipped into the room like a shadow dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit. He was 45, sharp-featured, with a splash of silver at his temples and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He didn't carry flowers or a teddy bear from the hospital gift shop. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase secured with a biometric lock. To me, it looked like a lifeline. "You look like hell, Maya," David said, his voice a low, gravelly hum as he pulled up the plastic visitor's chair. He didn't offer empty sympathies. That wasn't our dynamic. "I feel worse than I look," I rasped, shifting my upper body slightly. The pain in my crushed legs flared, a violent hot throb beneath the heavy plaster. "Did you bring the paperwork?" David placed the briefcase on my tray table, pressed his thumb to the sensor, and popped the latches. Silicon Valley doesn't mess around. The acquisition team at Vanguard Tech fast-tracked the term sheets the second I told them the IP was fully unencumbered. "But before you sign this, we need to talk about your husband." He pulled out a thick stack of documents, the crisp white paper looking stark against the sterile hospital environment. "Nathan filed a durable power of attorney with hospital administration 30 minutes ago," David continued, his eyes locking onto mine. "He also requested a psychiatric evaluation to formally establish that you are suffering from severe cognitive impairment due to a traumatic brain injury. He's building a paper trail to take absolute control of your life. If he gets that medical sign-off, he can legally access the LLC." "He won't get it," I said, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. "The MRI came back clean. I have a minor concussion. And the signature on that POA is a blatant forgery. I made sure of it." "I know," David smirked slightly, a predatory glint in his eye. "I already pulled the hospital's copy. A first-year law student could tear that signature apart in a deposition. But we aren't going to contest it yet. We are going to let him think he's winning. We use his own narrative against him. If Nathan wants you tucked away in a facility for mentally incapacitated patients so he can play CEO with his mistress, we let him sign the transfer orders." I frowned, the throbbing in my legs making it hard to concentrate. "But if he transfers me to a state-run nursing home, I'm trapped. I need the reconstructive surgery, David. If I stay in these plaster casts for another week, the bones will calcify. I'll be crippled." "You aren't going to a state-run facility," David said smoothly, pulling a custom-engraved Montblanc pen from his inner jacket pocket. "Nathan is going to authorize a transfer to Shady Grove Rehabilitation, a mid-tier, underfunded clinic that takes his terrible insurance, but you are never going to arrive there." He slid the Vanguard Tech acquisition contract onto my lap. "Sign this first. Right now, Leo's world is shielded by the ironclad operating agreement I drafted for you 3 years ago. It predates your marriage, and Nathan's name is nowhere near the cap table. The second your real signature hits this paper, Vanguard wires $12 million into a blind trust we set up this morning. From there, the funds will immediately bounce into a shell company." "Apex Holdings," I whispered, remembering a contingency plan we had joked about years ago over coffee. Exactly. Apex Holdings. David nodded. Apex will become your war chest. Apex is going to hire a private medical transport to intercept your ambulance tomorrow morning. Apex is going to check you into the Sterling Private Surgical Institute upstate under a strict NDA. And Apex is going to pay the $50,000 in cash for the top orthopedic surgeon on the East Coast to rip those cheap casts off your legs and rebuild you with military-grade titanium. I stared at the contract resting on my hospital gown. $12 million. The numbers blurred as my eyes welled up. I thought of Leo. I thought of his little hands building plastic castles on the living room rug. I thought of Nathan standing in this exact spot an hour ago, feeding me a lie while planning to steal my son's future. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, took the heavy Mont Blanc pen from David, and signed my name. Maya E. Vance. Crisp, clear, and unshakable. It's done, David said, slipping the paperwork back into his briefcase. The wire transfer will clear by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Now, here is a burner phone. He placed a small, prepaid smartphone on my pillow. Keep it hidden. Only call me. To Nathan, to the world, you are a ghost locked away in a traumatic brain injury ward, unable to receive visitors. Let him hang himself with his own rope. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated deception and agonizing pain. Nathan visited one last time the following morning. He stood at the foot of my bed, checking his Rolex, vibrating with nervous, greedy energy. He had signed the discharge papers, legally washing his hands of my medical care. They're moving you to Shady Grove today, babe, he said, offering a tight, fake smile. The doctors say you need absolute quiet. No screens, no visitors. It's strict protocol for the TBI. I hate that I can't see you, but I have to keep the startup afloat for us, right? I'll call the nurses for updates. Thank you, Nathan, I whispered, playing the part of the broken, heavily sedated wife flawlessly. Take care of Leo. Ways. He lied before turning his back on me and walking out the door. He didn't even look back. 2 hours later, the private transport David arranged arrived. The paramedics didn't wear standard city uniforms. They wore sleek navy scrubs and moved with absolute silent precision. They loaded my stretcher into an unmarked luxury medical transport van. We didn't drive to Shady Grove. We drove 2 hours north, deep into the forested hills of upstate New York, arriving at a private, heavily gated compound that looked more like a billionaire's retreat than a hospital. Within 20 minutes of my arrival at the Sterling Private Surgical Institute, I was wheeled into a state-of-the-art operating theater. Dr. Aris, a renowned orthopedic surgeon who looked like he had stepped off the cover of a medical journal, stood over me. He took one look at the heavy plaster cast Nathan had authorized and shook his head in absolute disgust. Barbaric, Dr. Aris muttered, snapping his latex gloves on. If you had stayed in these for another week, Mrs. Vance, the bone necrosis would have been irreversible. We are taking these off right now. We're going to use titanium intramedullary nails to stabilize both the femurs and the tibias. It will be a grueling recovery, but you will walk again. Make me strong enough to run, doctor, I said, my voice trembling as the anesthesiologist placed the clear mask over my nose and mouth. Please. Count back from 10, the anesthesiologist said softly. 10, 9, Leo, 8. I'm coming for you. 7. When I woke up, the darkness had shifted. The dull, heavy, suffocating ache of the plaster was gone. In its place was a sharp, electrifying, blinding agony that tore through my lower half. It felt as though someone had poured molten lava directly into the marrow of my bones. I let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed off the soundproof walls of my private recovery suite. A nurse was there instantly, injecting a heavy dose of Dilaudid directly into my IV line. Breathe, Maya. Breathe through it. The surgery was a complete success. The titanium is in place. I looked down. My legs were no longer hidden inside yellowing plaster. They were heavily bandaged, elevated on specialized foam wedges with surgical drains snaking out from beneath the gauze. The pain was absolute hell. But as the narcotics washed over my brain, taking the razor edge off the agony, a strange sense of euphoria settled deep in my chest. This wasn't the pain of neglect, this was the pain of reconstruction. I was a building being retrofitted with steel beams. I was getting stronger. October bled into November. The private facility was a fortress of solitude. Outside my window, the vibrant autumn leaves turned brown and fell, leaving the trees bare and skeletal against the gray New York sky. Inside, my life was a relentless, grueling boot camp. Physical therapy began on day 5. It was a special kind of torture. My physical therapist, Sarah, was a former military medic who didn't accept tears as an excuse. The first time she made me sit up and dangle my legs over the edge of the bed, the rush of blood to my newly pinned bones made me vomit from the sheer pain. "Again," Sarah commanded, wiping my mouth with a cool towel. "You want to walk into that courtroom? You have to earn it. The titanium only holds the bone. Your muscles have to do the work. Let's go. On your feet." I gripped the parallel bars of the rehabilitation room until my knuckles threatened to burst through my skin. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. Every millimeter of movement felt like tearing fresh scar tissue. I sobbed. I cursed. I begged her to let me sit down. But then, I would look at the screen of my burner phone resting on the therapy bench. It was a video David had managed to secure through a private investigator he hired to watch my son. It was a blurry, zoomed-in video of Leo at the park. He was wearing his little blue winter coat, sitting alone in the sandbox while Nathan stood 20 feet away, completely engrossed in his phone, ignoring his son. Chloe wasn't there. Nathan looked stressed, pacing back and forth, dragging a hand through his perfectly gelled hair. Watching Nathan neglect my child ignited a fury inside me that burned hotter than any physical pain. It was a primal maternal rage. "One more step, Maya," Sarah urged, her hands hovering near my waist to catch me if I fell. I locked my jaw, visualizing Nathan's arrogant face, remembering the fake, condescending kiss he gave me before abandoning me to a wheelchair. I didn't just take one step. I dragged my heavy, trembling right leg forward, planting it on the rubber mat. Then, fighting through a wave of nausea, I pulled my left leg forward to meet it. "Good, good," Sarah praised. By Thanksgiving, I wasn't just walking in the parallel bars. I was using a custom-fitted carbon fiber cane to navigate the hallways of the clinic. The limp was pronounced, and my muscles screamed in protest by the end of every day, but the bone grafts were holding beautifully. The titanium was becoming a part of me. During my brief hours of rest, I wasn't sleeping. I was plotting. David visited every Friday evening, bringing a secure encrypted laptop and updates from the outside world. He would sit in the leather armchair in my suite, pouring 2 fingers of expensive scotch from a flask he kept in his coat while we reviewed the battlefield. "Nathan is officially drowning," David reported on a freezing night in early December, pulling up a financial dossier on the screen. "He tried to execute your fake power of attorney 2 weeks ago to sell Leo's World. The holding company that manages the app flagged it immediately. When his lawyers tried to push it through, they hit a brick wall. Vanguard Tech's legal team sent them a cease and desist, informing them the IP was already acquired by an anonymous third-party trust." I smiled, a cold, predatory curve of my lips. How did he react? "He panicked," David chuckled, taking a sip of his scotch. "According to my sources inside his office, he threw a coffee mug at the wall and completely melted down. He has no idea it was you. He assumes the LLC's management board sold it out from under him while you were incapacitated." "And Chloe?" I asked, leaning back against my pillows, icing my swollen knees. "Chloe is whispering in his ear, telling him to pivot," David said, his eyes narrowing. "They missed payroll last week. The angel investors have completely abandoned them. Nathan is desperate for a cash injection to keep up appearances. He just took out a massive, high-interest collateralized loan from a predatory private equity firm to cover the startup's operating costs and his own personal credit card debts." I looked at David, my heart beating a steady, relentless rhythm. Apex Holdings has $12 million sitting in cash, David. What does a predatory private equity firm do when a debtor shows signs of extreme distress? David smiled, a genuine, terrifying grin that showed all his teeth. They sell the toxic debt to a larger fish to cut their losses. "Buy it," I commanded, my voice echoing in the quiet room with the absolute authority of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "Call the firm, use Apex Holdings, buy Nathan's corporate debt, buy his personal credit lines, buy the mortgage on the house." David closed the laptop with a satisfying snap. "Consider it done, boss. By Christmas, Nathan won't own the shirt on his back. You will." I looked down at my legs, tracing the long, thin surgical scars running down my calves. The physical reconstruction was almost complete. The financial reconstruction was executing flawlessly. Nathan thought he had buried me alive. He didn't realize he had just planted a seed and I was about to break the surface. The 3rd week of December brought a bitter, howling blizzard to upstate New York, burying the private surgical institute under 3 feet of snow. Outside my window, the world was a frozen, silent expanse of white. Inside the padded rehabilitation gym, however, I was burning up. Push it, Maya. Don't favor the left, even weight distribution. Sarah, my physical therapist, barked from across the mat. I gritted my teeth, a bead of sweat stinging my eye. I was standing in the center of the room, my hands gripping the rubber handles of my carbon fiber cane. My legs, encased in compression sleeves to manage the swelling around the surgical incisions, trembled violently. Every muscle fiber in my lower body felt like it was being stretched over a hot coal. But the bone, the titanium-reinforced architecture holding me upright, held firm. I'm trying, I gasped, forcing my left heel down flat against the mat. The shooting pain was immediate, a sharp spike of static electricity traveling up my spine, but I didn't collapse. 3 more steps, give me 3 clean steps, no dragging, Sarah demanded, her arms crossed over her chest. I closed my eyes, visualizing the heavy oak doors of a family courtroom. I pictured Nathan's smug face. I pictured Chloe's condescending smirk. I took a breath that rattled in my chest, opened my eyes, and stepped forward. Heel, toe, shift the weight, breathe, step, heel, toe. By the 3rd step, my knee buckled slightly, but the cane caught my weight before I hit the mat. Time, Sarah called out, clicking her stopwatch. She walked over and handed me a towel, her stern expression softening just a fraction. That was 90 seconds of unassisted weight bearing. Last week, you couldn't do 30. You're becoming a machine, Maya. I wiped the sweat from my face, my chest heaving. A machine doesn't feel like its shins are being put through a wood chipper. Pain is just weakness leaving the body, she replied dryly, the old military mantra slipping out. Hit the showers. Your lawyer is waiting in your suite. He looks like the cat that ate the canary. And 10 minutes later, I limped into my private room, wrapped in a thick terry cloth robe, leaning heavily on the cane. David Sterling was already there, making himself comfortable in the leather armchair. The encrypted laptop was open on his lap, casting a harsh blue glow across his sharp features. A crystal tumbler of amber scotch rested on the side table. You're in a good mood for a man braving a blizzard on a Friday night, I said, easing myself onto the edge of the mattress and propping my aching legs onto a stack of pillows. David didn't look up from the screen, but his lips curled into a wicked smile. I love the snow, Maya. It buries all the dirt. And speaking of dirt, my forensic accounting team just finished digging through the digital trash of Nathan's startup. He turned the laptop around so the screen faced me. It was a dizzying spreadsheet, a labyrinth of red and black numbers, highlighted rows, and complex flowcharts mapping out wire transfers. I told you last week that we were moving Apex Holdings to buy up Nathan's bad debt, David began, his voice taking on that crisp boardroom cadence. It was almost too easy. The private equity firm he borrowed from, Vulture Capital essentially, was thrilled to offload his high-risk paper at a slight discount. As of yesterday at 4 p.m., Apex Holdings officially holds the promissory notes to his company's operational lines of credit, the second mortgage he secretly took out on your house, and his maxed-out Platinum American Express. I stared at the numbers. They were staggering. He burned through a second mortgage? We paid off a chunk of that house before Leo was born. He didn't just burn through it. He incinerated it, David said, taking a slow sip of his scotch. But here is the real kicker, Maya. Here is the masterpiece. When my guys audited the accounts to evaluate the risk profile of the debt we were buying, they noticed a massive bleeding anomaly in the startup's operational expenses. He tapped a key and the spreadsheet zoomed in on a specific column labeled Vendor Consulting Fees. Nathan isn't just a terrible CEO, David continued, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. He's a mark. He is the textbook definition of a useful idiot. I frowned, leaning forward, ignoring the throbbing in my calves. What do you mean? Who is playing him? Chloe, David said flatly, dropping the bomb with surgical precision. I blinked. His mistress? I thought she was helping him keep the company afloat to save her own job. David let out a harsh, cynical laugh. Chloe isn't trying to save the ship, Maya. She's the one drilling holes in the hull and loading the life rafts with solid gold. Over the past 8 months, Chloe has been authorizing 6-figure payments to a third-party consulting firm based out of Delaware. They supposedly provided investor relations outreach and market analytics. It's ghost software. The firm doesn't exist. He pointed to a web of arrows on the screen. The Delaware LLC is a shell company. The funds bounce from Nathan's startup into the shell and then route directly to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account that, after some very expensive digital persuasion by my private investigator, we confirmed is solely controlled by Chloe. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the howling wind rattling the reinforced window panes. I sat back, the magnitude of the betrayal washing over me. Nathan had left me to rot in a plaster cast to save $50,000 for a company that his mistress was actively looting for millions. He was so blinded by his own arrogance, so obsessed with playing the big shot Silicon Valley executive, that he didn't even realize the woman sharing his bed was picking his pockets clean. "She's embezzling," I whispered, a cold, dark sense of irony wrapping around my heart. "Textbook corporate fraud," David confirmed. "She's been cooking the books right under his nose. My guess? She knew the startup was a sinking ship a year ago. She stayed to siphon every last drop of venture capital they had. When Nathan panicked about the burn rate back in August, she didn't want him to sell Leo's World to save the company. She wanted him to sell it so she could steal that money too, before pulling the ripcord and disappearing." "Does Nathan know?" "Not a clue," David said, pulling a sleek black USB drive from his pocket and plugging it into the laptop. "He is completely, pathetically whipped. I managed to clone the audio from a security camera at a high-end steakhouse downtown 2 nights ago. Nathan and Chloe were having dinner. Listen to this." David clicked a file. The audio was slightly muffled by the background noise of clinking silverware and ambient restaurant chatter, but the voices were unmistakable. "I'm telling you, Chloe, we're bleeding out." Nathan's voice filtered through the speakers, sounding strained, pitched high with panic. "The new bridge loan is keeping the servers running, but the interest rate is absolute highway robbery. If we don't close a Series A round by January, I'm taking a bath, a massive bath. I might have to file Chapter 11. There was the sound of a glass being set down. Then Chloe's voice. Smooth, calm, dripping with a manufactured empathy that made my skin crawl. "Relax, babe. Breathe," she cooed. "You're spiraling. I'm massaging the quarterly projections right now. The numbers will look great for the pitch next week. We just need to weather the storm. I'm right here with you, okay? Ride or die." I know, Nathan sighed heavily. My lawyer said Maya's medical proxy is stuck in probate hell. The hospital shrink wouldn't sign off on the full incompetency form because she wasn't displaying aggressive dementia. It's stalling the sale of her app. If I could just liquidate that stupid kitty game, we'd have breathing room. "We'll get it, Nate," Chloe murmured softly. "Just keep playing the concerned husband. By the time she's out of rehab, we'll be sipping margaritas in Cabo and she'll be living on disability checks. Trust the process." David hit the spacebar, pausing the audio. I stared at the black screen, my hands gripping the thick fabric of my robe. Living on disability checks. They had it all planned out. They were going to strip my life down to the studs, sell the copper wire, and leave me in the ruins. "She's gaslighting him," I said, my voice eerily calm. "She's keeping him pacified just long enough to drain the last drops of the new loan he just took out." "Exactly," David nodded, closing the laptop. "And the beautiful part? Nathan used the house you paid the down payment for, the house where your son sleeps, as collateral for that new loan, a loan that Apex Holdings now owns." I looked up at David, the realization of my new reality settling deep into my bones. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I wasn't just a wealthy woman hiding in a clinic. I was the architect of their impending destruction. "I own him," I said softly, testing the words on my tongue. They tasted like iron and victory. "You own the paper on his entire life," David corrected, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "If Nathan misses a single payment, and with Chloe draining the accounts, he will miss a payment very soon, Apex Holdings has the legal right to seize his corporate assets, freeze his business accounts, and foreclose on his primary residence. I can have him locked out of his own office and his own home in 30 days. "No," I said instantly, my eyes narrowing. "Not yet. If we crush him financially right now, he'll declare bankruptcy, play the victim, and drag the divorce proceedings out for years in civil court. I don't care about his money, David. I have $12 million. I care about Leo." I reached for my burner phone on the bedside table, lighting up the lock screen. It was a picture of Leo smiling, missing one of his front teeth. My heart physically ached at the sight of him. I had been away from him for nearly 4 months. The holidays were approaching, and another woman was going to be hanging his stocking. The thought was a physical torment, sharper than any scalpel doctor Eris had used. Nathan is gearing up for a custody battle, I continued, my mind racing, snapping the pieces of the puzzle together. He knows that if he divorces a disabled, unemployed woman, he might have to pay alimony, but if he paints me as mentally unfit, he gets 100% physical and legal custody. He'll use Leo as a pawn. He'll use my son to extort me for the rights to the app. He's already moving in that direction, David agreed, his expression turning grim. Nathan's lawyers filed the preliminary divorce petition in family court yesterday. He's petitioning for sole custody, citing your prolonged institutionalization and mental instability following the accident. They've requested a mandatory mediation hearing for the last week of January. I looked down at my cane. I wrapped my fingers around the smooth carbon fiber. Let him file, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let him build his entire case on the premise that I am a broken, crazy woman in a wheelchair. Let him walk into that courthouse thinking he has already won. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. The pain in my legs flared instantly, a violent protest from the newly healed tissue, but I locked my knees. I stood under my own power, my bare feet planted firmly on the hardwood floor of the clinic. I looked David Sterling dead in the eye. Because when January comes, David, I am going to walk into that courtroom. I am going to let him present his lies to the judge. And then I am going to drop a $12 million bank statement on the table, expose his mistress for the thief she is, and take my son away from him. David looked at me, standing tall without assistance for the first time in months. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. He raised his tumbler of scotch in a silent toast. "Scorched earth, Maya," David murmured. "Scorched earth," I echoed. Let them enjoy their Christmas. It's the last one they'll ever spend in my house. January 2026 arrived with a bitter, biting chill that turned the city's snow into a thick, gray slush. The holidays had come and gone while I was locked away in my private rehabilitation fortress. I had spent Christmas morning staring at a photograph of Leo on my burner phone, crying silent hot tears into my pillow, while Nathan and Chloe presumably opened presents under my roof. But the tears were gone now. The grief had been entirely consumed by a cold, terrifying clarity. I was no longer a patient at the Sterling Private Surgical Institute. 3 days ago, Dr. Eris had signed my discharge papers, marveling at the titanium framework that had fused flawlessly with my bone. I had relocated to a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons downtown, just a 5-minute drive from the family courthouse. The suite was paid for in cash by Apex Holdings. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city skyline. I wasn't wearing college sweatpants or an oversized hoodie. I was wearing a tailored charcoal gray wool sheath dress that fit like armor. And on my feet, I wore a pair of black 4-inch Christian Louboutin pumps. Every step I took was a calculated rebellion against the man who had condemned me to a wheelchair. The pain was still there, a dull, rhythmic ache in my shins that flared whenever the weather dropped below freezing. But I welcomed it. It kept me sharp. It reminded me of the stakes. I paced the length of the hardwood floor, heel toe, forcing my stride to be perfectly even. No limp, no hesitation. Just the sharp, authoritative click, click, click of a woman who was about to burn her husband's world to the ground. The heavy oak door of the suite clicked open, and David Sterling walked in. He didn't knock. We had moved far past basic pleasantries. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the glass coffee table, shrugging off his cashmere overcoat. The winter wind had whipped a rare flush into his cheeks, but his eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of an apex predator circling a wounded deer. "They filed it," David announced, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "The custody petition arrived at my office an hour ago by specialized courier. Nathan is going for the jugular." I stopped pacing. I didn't flinch. I walked over to the coffee table and looked down at the thick manila envelope. "Show me." David pulled out a stack of legal documents secured with a heavy binder clip. He handed them to me, watching my face closely. I flipped to the second page, scanning the dense legalese until my eyes locked onto the summary of arguments. Petitioner: Nathan Vance respectfully requests full physical and legal custody of the minor child, Leo Vance. The respondent, Maya Vance, is currently institutionalized and completely incapable of providing a safe, stable environment. Following a severe motor vehicle collision in August 2025, the respondent suffered profound traumatic brain injury, TBY, leading to severe post-traumatic psychosis, aggressive dementia, and permanent physical disability. A dark, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Aggressive dementia? That's a new one. I thought I was just concussed. Chloe's touch, no doubt, David said, unbuttoning his suit jacket and sitting on the edge of the sofa. She's pushing him to paint you not just as an unfit mother, but as a danger to society. If the judge believes you're psychotic, Nathan doesn't just get Leo. He gets leverage. He can petition the state to force the liquidation of your assets to cover your long-term institutional care, namely, the sale of your app. I traced my perfectly manicured fingernail over the lies printed on the page. How did he get a judge to even look at this? I haven't seen a hospital psychiatrist since August. He can't just make up a medical diagnosis out of thin air. He didn't make it up, David replied, leaning forward, steepling his fingers together. He bought it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a secondary document, a sworn affidavit complete with a medical seal. He slid it across the glass table toward me. "Meet Dr. Arthur Evans," David said, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. He's a strip mall psychiatrist operating out of a shady clinic in New Jersey, known for writing heavy prescription refills, no questions asked, and acting as an expert witness for whoever hands him the fattest envelope of cash. Nathan paid him $10,000 under the table to review a heavily redacted version of your initial ICU chart and sign this affidavit swearing that you are completely detached from reality. My blood ran ice cold. I stared at the signature of a doctor I had never met, a man willing to strip a mother of her child for the price of a used Honda. Nathan is submitting forged medical testimony to a family court judge. That's perjury. That's a federal crime. It's a slam dunk for a felony indictment, David corrected smoothly, but only if we can prove he bought the doctor. Nathan thinks he's playing 3D chess, Maya. He thinks this affidavit is the nail in the coffin for tomorrow's mediation hearing. He and Chloe are probably popping cheap champagne in your kitchen right now, celebrating their brilliant strategy. So, how do we break the doctor? I asked, my eyes snapping up to meet David's. I knew my lawyer hadn't brought me this problem without already holding the solution. David offered a slow, terrifying smile. I didn't break him, Maya. I shattered him. My private investigators spent the last week digging into Dr. Arthur Evans. Turns out, the good doctor has a massive, crippling gambling addiction and owes roughly $200,000 to some very unsavory bookies in Atlantic City. He also has 3 pending malpractice complaints that he's been desperately trying to keep quiet to save his medical license. David stood up, walking over to the minibar to pour himself a glass of sparkling water. I paid Dr. Evans a little visit yesterday evening, just a friendly chat between professionals. I laid out his gambling debts, his malpractice suits, and the very real threat of federal prison time for committing perjury in a child custody case. And? I asked, my heart hammering a steady, victorious rhythm against my ribs. And Dr. Evans sang like a canary, David chuckled, taking a sip of his water. He flipped on Nathan in about 4 minutes. I have a recorded, legally admissible confession from Evans stating that Nathan Vance approached him, offered him a $10,000 bribe, and explicitly instructed him to fabricate the dementia diagnosis to secure full custody of Leo. I closed my eyes, a long, shaky breath escaping my lungs. The relief was intoxicating. Nathan had built his entire offensive strategy on a landmine, and he was about to step directly onto the pressure plate. Will Evans be at the courthouse tomorrow? I asked. Oh, he'll be there, David assured me. Nathan subpoenaed him as a star witness. But when Evans takes the stand, he isn't going to read Nathan's script. He's going to read ours. I walked back to the window, looking down at the crawling yellow taxis and the tiny ant-like figures of people rushing through the winter slush. My mind was a steel trap, locking down every variable, every possible countermove Nathan could try to pull. What about the financial snare? I asked, keeping my gaze fixed on the city. We can't just beat him on the custody front. I want him completely hollowed out. I want him to leave that courthouse with nothing but the clothes on his back. David's reflection appeared in the glass beside mine. The snare is pulled tight, Maya. You recall the high-interest operational loans and the second mortgage that Apex Holdings bought from Vulture Capital last month? Of course. The monthly minimum payment was due on January 15th, David said, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with impending doom. It was a balloon payment, $65,000 just to cover the interest. Did he make it? I asked. though I already knew the answer. He missed it by a mile, David said. My forensic accountants flagged his accounts. Thanks to Chloe's aggressive embezzlement routing funds to the Caymans, the startup's operating account had a balance of exactly $412 on the 15th. Nathan defaulted. I turned around, the Louboutins clicking sharply on the hardwood. So Apex Holdings has the legal right to foreclose. Apex Holdings has the legal right to seize the startup's IP, freeze all corporate accounts, repossess his leased Mercedes, and foreclose on the suburban house, David corrected, pulling a thick red folder from his briefcase. I have the default notices and the asset seizure warrants fully drafted and signed by a commercial judge. They are sitting right here in this folder. Why haven't they been served? I asked, my eyes locked on the red folder like it was the Holy Grail. Because we are holding them for maximum psychological impact, David said, his eyes gleaming with a ruthless, calculated intellect. If we served him yesterday, he would have panicked, called his bankruptcy lawyers, and delayed the custody hearing. He would have used the financial ruin to play for sympathy. I want him to walk into that mediation room tomorrow morning thinking he is the king of the world. I want him to sit across from the judge, puff out his chest, and demand your son. David tapped the red folder against the glass table, and right at the exact moment he thinks he has won, right when he reaches the absolute peak of his arrogance, we drop the floor out from under him. I looked at the paperwork scattered across the table. I looked at the forged medical affidavit. I thought of Chloe sitting in my kitchen, spending my money, plotting to strip me of my child to fund her offshore escape. I thought of Nathan, the man who had promised to protect me, who had left me bleeding in a hospital bed to save his own pathetic ego. They thought they were playing a game of checkers with a brain-damaged invalid. They had no idea I had bought the entire board, changed all the rules, and brought a grandmaster to execute the checkmate. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I said, my voice eerily calm. The storm inside me had quieted, replaced by the deadly stillness of a sniper lining up the final shot. Family Court, room 402. I will meet you at the courthouse steps at 8:45, David said, buttoning his overcoat and picking up his briefcase. Get some sleep tonight, Maya. Tomorrow you get your son back. Good night, David. When the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the sprawling penthouse, I didn't go to bed. I walked into the master bedroom and opened the small, velvet-lined safe hidden in the closet. I reached inside and pulled out the only thing I had brought with me from the wrecked car. It was a small plastic blue building block. One of the pieces Leo had used to build his castle on the living room rug the night before the crash. I held the cheap piece of plastic in the palm of my hand, feeling the sharp edges press into my skin. It was worth pennies, but to me, it was more valuable than the $12 million sitting in the Apex Holdings Trust. I closed my fist around the block, my jaw setting into concrete. I'm coming, baby, I whispered to the empty room, my voice a fierce, unbreakable vow. Mommy's coming. I walked over to the mirror and looked at my reflection. The exhausted, sweatpants-wearing freelancer was dead. The broken, sobbing woman in the plaster cast was dead. The woman staring back at me was an absolute weapon. I set the blue block on the nightstand next to my burner phone. Tomorrow, Nathan Vance was going to learn the most brutal lesson of his life. You can steal a woman's money, you can betray her trust, and you can even break her bones. But you never, ever back a mother into a corner, because when you do, she doesn't just bite back. She tears your entire world apart. I turned off the lights and lay down in the darkness, listening to the city hum below me. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun to rise, counting the seconds until the hunt began. The morning of the custody hearing was bitterly cold, the kind of New York chill that bites through wool and settles deep into your bones. But sitting in the back of the idling, tinted black SUV parked across from the downtown family court building, I didn't feel the temperature. I was running purely on adrenaline and an icy, focused rage. Through the smoked glass, I watched them arrive. Nathan strutted up the wide concrete steps of the courthouse looking like a man arriving at a victory party rather than a custody mediation. He wore a brand new midnight blue tailored suit, likely paid for with the high-interest credit line Apex Holdings now owned. His hair was slicked back, and he held a leather briefcase that probably contained nothing but blank paper and his own inflated ego. Right beside him, clinging to his arm like a barnacle on a sinking ship, was Chloe. She was dressed in a conservative, beige cashmere turtleneck and a pencil skirt, clearly trying to project the image of a stable, maternal stepmother. Draped over her forearm was a brand new Chanel handbag. I recognized it from a boutique window. It retailed for around $8,000. I watched that bag swing as she walked, knowing exactly which offshore Cayman account had funded it. "Look at them," I murmured, my breath fogging the cold glass. They look so incredibly bored, like stealing a child is just another item on their morning to-do list. Sitting next to me, David Sterling checked the platinum Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. "Arrogance is a sedative, Maya. It makes you blind to the oncoming train. Let them get comfortable inside. We give them exactly 15 minutes to dig their own grave on the official court record. Then we walk in and bury them." I nodded, gripping the door handle. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. Inside room 402, the atmosphere was suffocatingly formal. We had an audio feed patched through from David's associate, who was sitting quietly in the back row of the public gallery. Through the earpiece hidden under my sleek, straightened hair, I listened as the court clerk called the docket to order. "Case number 74B, Vance versus Vance. Petition for sole physical and legal custody." Judge Harper's voice cut through the static. She was a veteran family court judge known for her zero-tolerance policy regarding parental alienation and courtroom theatrics. "I have reviewed the preliminary filings," Judge Harper said, her tone dry and exhausted. "Mr. Vance, I see you are present with your counsel. I note that the respondent, Maya Vance, is not present. Has she been properly served?" Nathan's attorney, a slick, fast-talking litigator named Miller, stood up. I could hear the rustle of his papers over the feed. "Your Honor, the respondent was served via her medical proxy, which is my client, Mr. Vance. As outlined in our petition, Mrs. Vance is currently a long-term resident at the Shady Grove Rehabilitation Center following a catastrophic motor vehicle collision in August." Miller paused, letting the silence hang for dramatic effect. He was playing the room. "Your Honor, it brings my client no joy to be here today. He loves his wife, but the reality is tragic. Mrs. Vance suffered profound traumatic brain injury. She is confined to a wheelchair, requires round-the-clock nursing care, and suffers from severe, aggressive dementia. She no longer recognizes her own surroundings, let alone her 4-year-old son, Leo. In the SUV, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Mr. Vance has been carrying the crushing burden of managing a tech startup while effectively being a single father for the past 5 months, Miller continued, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. He is simply formalizing a tragic reality. To leave the child's legal custody in a state of limbo with a mother who is, respectfully, a ghost of her former self is a danger to the child's welfare. These are severe claims, Mr. Miller, Judge Harper noted, the skepticism evident in her voice. You are asking me to strip a mother of all parental rights without her even being present to defend herself. Do you have medical documentation to back up this aggressive dementia diagnosis? I heard the squeak of Nathan's expensive leather shoes as he shifted his weight. We do, Your Honor, Miller said confidently. We have submitted a sworn affidavit from Dr. Arthur Evans, an independent psychiatric specialist who reviewed Mrs. Vance's charts. Furthermore, Dr. Evans is waiting in the hallway outside to provide expert testimony to the fact that Mrs. Vance is entirely detached from reality and mentally unfit to parent. I see, Judge Harper said, the rustling of paper echoing over the mic as she flipped through the forged documents. And does the respondent have legal representation? Has anyone from her family attempted to contact this court? No, Your Honor, Miller said smoothly. She is completely incapacitated. We are respectfully requesting an immediate default judgment granting sole custody to Mr. Vance, so this family can begin to heal. In the back of the SUV, David reached over and tapped my shoulder. That's our cue, he said, his eyes glinting like broken glass. Showtime. I pushed the heavy door of the SUV open and stepped out into the freezing slush. I didn't shiver. I didn't look down at the icy pavement. I locked my knees, feeling the cold, hard bite of the titanium rod supporting my weight, and began to walk. Click, click, click. My 4-inch Christian Louboutin struck the concrete steps of the courthouse with the steady, relentless rhythm of a metronome. David walked half a pace behind me, his black leather briefcase gripping the evidence that was about to detonate Nathan's life. We bypassed the metal detectors through the attorney express lane and rode the elevator up to the 4th floor. The hallway outside room 402 was quiet, save for a nervous, sweating man in a cheap suit sitting on a wooden bench. It was Dr. Arthur Evans. When he saw David Sterling approach, the color completely drained from the corrupt doctor's face. He looked like he was about to vomit. David gave him a terrifyingly polite nod, then reached out and pushed the heavy oak double doors of the courtroom wide open. The heavy thud of the doors hitting the doorstops echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Every head in room 402 snapped toward the entrance. I didn't pause. I walked straight down the center aisle, my posture perfectly rigid, my charcoal gray wool dress immaculate. I didn't limp. I didn't use a cane. I moved with the effortless, predatory grace of a woman who owned the room. Nathan was sitting at the petitioner's table, a look of solemn, fake grief plastered on his face. When his eyes landed on me, the performance died instantly. His jaw physically dropped. His eyes widened until the whites showed all the way around, his pupils dilating in pure, unadulterated shock. He looked like a man staring at a ghost that had just crawled out of a television screen. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He tried to speak, to say my name, but his throat just worked uselessly, producing a choked, gasping sound. Sitting in the gallery directly behind him, Chloe let out a sharp, audible gasp, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. I didn't look at her. I didn't even look at Nathan. I walked straight past their table, the scent of my expensive perfume cutting through Nathan's cedarwood cologne, and took my seat at the empty respondents' table. David Sterling took the chair next to me, calmly unlatching his briefcase. Judge Harper peered over her reading glasses, clearly taken aback by the dramatic entrance. "And who might you be?" she asked, her voice stern but laced with curiosity. David stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "David Sterling, Your Honor, representing the respondent, Mrs. Maya Vance, and sitting beside me is my client, Mrs. Vance herself. We apologize for our tardiness. The morning traffic from the Four Seasons was dreadful." The courtroom fell so silent you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Nathan's lawyer, Miller, looked like he had been struck by lightning. He looked down at the paperwork in his hands, which described a brain-damaged invalid on a feeding tube, and then looked up at me. I was sitting straight-backed, my legs elegantly crossed, looking back at him with an expression of absolute freezing calm. "Your Honor, this is impossible," Nathan finally stammered, jumping to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. She can't walk. She's in a wheelchair. She's at Shady Grove." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Judge Harper snapped, banging her gavel once. She turned her sharp gaze to my table. "Mr. Sterling, the petition before me claims your client is suffering from aggressive dementia and profound physical paralysis. Yet, she just walked into my courtroom in stilettos. Care to explain this massive discrepancy?" "Gladly, Your Honor," David said smoothly, pulling a crisp white envelope from his briefcase. "My client was indeed in a horrific collision in August. However, she was never transferred to Shady Grove Rehabilitation. That was a lie fabricated by her husband to hide her away." Mrs. Vance underwent extensive, state-of-the-art reconstructive surgery at the Sterling Private Surgical Institute. I have here a certified medical clearance from Dr. Elias Aris, the chief of orthopedic surgery, stating she has full, unassisted mobility. David handed the document to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge. "Furthermore," David continued, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room, "I am submitting a full neurological MRI panel signed yesterday by the head of neurology at Mount Sinai. It certifies that Mrs. Vance has 0 cognitive impairment, 0 brain damage, and an IQ that likely laps everyone sitting at the petitioner's table." Judge Harper scanned the documents, her brow furrowing. She looked over at Nathan, whose face was rapidly shifting from pale white to a mottled, panicked red. "Mr. Miller," Judge Harper said, her tone dangerously low, "you just stood in my courtroom and told me this woman was a vegetable. You submitted an affidavit claiming severe psychosis. How do you square your claims with the living, breathing, perfectly healthy woman sitting 10 feet away from you?" Miller was sweating profusely. He frantically whispered to Nathan, who was shaking his head violently. "Your Honor," Miller stammered, "my client was operating on the medical information he was given at the time. If Mrs. Vance has miraculously recovered, that is wonderful news. However," Miller scrambled to pivot, desperate to save his sinking ship. "However, physical health is only one aspect of custody. The fact remains that Mrs. Vance is unemployed. She was a freelance coder who hasn't worked in 5 months. She has no income, no home, and zero financial ability to provide a stable life for a 4-year-old child. Mr. Vance is the CEO of a tech startup. He provides the financial stability Leo needs. Nathan nodded vigorously, latching onto this lifeline. Yes, she has nothing, Your Honor. I pay for everything. She can't even afford rent without me. I finally turned my head. I looked directly into Nathan's eyes. He expected to see the meek, accommodating wife he had bullied for 5 years. Instead, he saw a woman holding a match over an ocean of gasoline. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. A slow, terrifying curve of my lips. David Sterling didn't miss a beat. Ah, the financial argument. I was hoping Mr. Miller would bring that up. David reached into his briefcase again. He didn't pull out a single sheet of paper. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound financial dossier and dropped it onto the mahogany table. The heavy thwack of the binder made Nathan jump. Your Honor, opposing counsel claims my client is destitute. I submit into evidence Exhibit C, the finalized acquisition contract between my client's private LLC and Vanguard Tech, executed in September 2025. Along with it, a certified bank statement from a blind trust held exclusively in my client's name. The bailiff took the heavy binder and placed it on the judge's bench. Judge Harper opened it, her eyes scanning the top page. Her eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. Mr. Sterling, am I reading these zeros correctly? Judge Harper asked, looking up in sheer disbelief. You are, Your Honor, David said, crossing his arms, looking directly at Nathan. My client's educational software application was acquired for a lump sum cash payment of $12 million. She is the sole proprietor. The funds are entirely unencumbered by marital assets, as the LLC predated the marriage and Mr. Vance's name was explicitly excluded from the cap table. Nathan stopped breathing. I watched the exact moment his reality shattered. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. 12 million. The number hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked back at Chloe, who was gripping the wooden railing of the gallery so hard her knuckles were white. Her eyes locked on David's briefcase with a mixture of raw greed and absolute horror. 12 million? Nathan choked out, ignoring courtroom protocol, pointing a shaking finger at me. That's a lie. Her app was a stupid kiddie game. It wasn't worth anything. She's lying. Order! Judge Harper barked, slamming her gavel. Mr. Vance, another outburst like that, and I will hold you in contempt. The bank statements are certified by Chase Manhattan. The funds are real. Miller, Nathan's lawyer, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. His entire case had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Your Honor, David cut in, refusing to give them a second to breathe. Not only is my client a multimillionaire, fully capable of providing an exceptional life for her son, but I would like to direct the court's attention back to the issue of Mr. Vance's supposed financial stability. David turned his back to the judge and faced Nathan directly. It was time to spring the trap. Mr. Miller claimed his client is a successful CEO, David said, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. Yet, a standard audit of Mr. Vance's public corporate filings reveals a very different story. Your Honor, Nathan Vance is not a provider. He is drowning in high-risk, predatory debt. He has a second mortgage in default, and his company's operational accounts have been drained down to double digits. Nathan's face went from red back to a sickening pale gray. Objection! Miller cried out, though it sounded weak. My client's corporate finances are irrelevant to his ability to parent. They are highly relevant when he is actively perjuring himself in this courtroom about his ability to provide. Judge Harper fired back. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Sterling. Thank you, David said, pulling out the infamous red folder from his briefcase. You see, Your Honor, my client didn't just use her $12 million to fix her legs. She used a fraction of it to set up a private holding company called Apex Holdings. Nathan flinched at the name. I saw his eyes dart back and forth, trying to understand why his wife's lawyer was bringing up the very shell company that had just bought his debt from the loan sharks. Last month, David continued, pacing slowly in front of Nathan's table, Apex Holdings purchased all of Mr. Vance's toxic corporate debt, his business loans, his credit cards, the mortgage on his house. Apex Holdings holds the paper on his entire life. David stopped walking. He looked at Nathan, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. And since Mr. Vance missed his balloon payment on January 15th, David said softly, his voice echoing like a judge reading a death sentence. Apex Holdings, which is wholly owned and operated by the woman sitting right there, executed its right of default at 8 a.m. this morning. David slapped the red folder down right in front of Nathan. As of an hour ago, Mr. Vance, David smiled, a chilling, shark-like grin. You no longer own a company. You no longer own your leased Mercedes. And you no longer own your house. My client is your sole creditor, and she is foreclosing on every single asset you possess. The courtroom spun into absolute breathless silence. The execution was flawless. Nathan wasn't just losing the custody battle. He had just been told on the public record that the wife he had thrown away like garbage was now the undisputed master of his universe. The silence in room 402 was so absolute it felt like a vacuum. The heavy, suffocating realization of my financial supremacy hung over Nathan's table like an executioner's blade. He sat frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, staring at the red folder David had just dropped in front of him. But a cornered animal will always thrash before it dies. His attorney, Miller, proved he was worth whatever exorbitant retainer Nathan had paid him. He sprang to his feet, adjusting his tie, his face flushed with a desperate, frantic energy. "Your Honor!" Miller shouted, breaking the silence. "I object to this entire line of presentation. This is a family court, not a commercial bankruptcy tribunal. Whatever corporate disputes exist between Mr. Vance and this shell company are irrelevant to his fitness as a parent. My client is a loving father. The respondent, despite her sudden windfall, is still psychologically compromised. I direct the court's attention back to Exhibit A, the sworn medical affidavit from Dr. Arthur Evans. A bank account does not cure aggressive dementia." Nathan grabbed onto this lifeline like a drowning man. "Yes, she's crazy, Your Honor. You heard the lawyer. The doctor said she's a danger to herself and my son." David Sterling didn't sit down. He didn't even blink. He just turned to the judge, his posture relaxed, exuding the terrifying calm of a man who held all the cards. "I completely agree with Mr. Miller, Your Honor," David said smoothly. "A bank account does not cure aggressive dementia, and the psychological fitness of the mother is the paramount issue today. Therefore, I believe the court should hear directly from the medical expert who diagnosed her." David turned toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. "The defense calls Dr. Arthur Evans to the stand." Nathan's head whipped around so fast I thought I heard his neck pop. The double doors groaned open, and Dr. Arthur Evans walked in. He didn't look like a confident medical expert. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. His cheap, ill-fitting suit hung off his sweating frame, and he clutched a leather portfolio to his chest as if it could shield him from the bullets that were about to fly. As Evans shuffled down the center aisle, he made the mistake of making eye contact with Nathan. Nathan mouthed a silent, frantic, "What are you doing?" But Evans immediately looked away, staring firmly at the floorboards. He stepped into the witness box and placed his trembling hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the bailiff asked. "I do," Evans squeaked, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to mop his glistening forehead. David approached the podium, resting his hands on the wooden edges. "Dr. Evans, you submitted a sworn affidavit to this court regarding the mental health of my client, Maya Vance. Is that correct?" "Yes," Evans mumbled into the microphone. "And in this affidavit, you diagnosed her with post-traumatic psychosis and aggressive dementia. Could you detail the extent of your clinical evaluation of Mrs. Vance?" Evans swallowed hard. The microphone picked up the dry click in his throat. He looked at Judge Harper, whose severe, unblinking gaze was boring a hole directly through his skull. Then he looked at David. He knew the audio recording of his confession was sitting in David's briefcase. I never evaluated her," Evans whispered. The courtroom erupted into a low murmur. Miller jumped up. "Objection! Hostile witness! Your Honor, the witness is clearly confused." "Sit down, Mr. Miller, before I hold you in contempt," Judge Harper barked, her gavel slamming down with the force of a thunderclap. "The witness will speak clearly into the microphone. Dr. Evans, you just stated under oath that you never evaluated the respondent, yet your signature is on a medical diagnosis submitted to this court." Evans gripped the edges of the witness box, his knuckles white. The dam broke. "I didn't evaluate her, Your Honor. I never even met her until I saw her sitting at that table today," Evans confessed, his voice shaking violently. "Mr. Vance approached me last week. He provided a heavily redacted file from the ICU, mostly just blood work and an initial concussion report. He told me he needed a specific diagnosis to ensure his son wasn't placed in the care of a disabled woman. And did Mr. Vance offer you any compensation for this specific diagnosis? David pressed, his voice sharp and precise. He gave me $10,000 in a manila envelope, Evan sobbed, fully breaking down on the stand. I have a gambling problem. I owed money. I was desperate. He told me it was just a formality. He said she was a vegetable anyway, that no one would ever question it. I'm sorry, I lied. The affidavit is completely fabricated. You son of a bitch! Nathan roared, lunging forward over the petitioner's table. It took 2 court bailiffs less than 3 seconds to tackle him. They grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back, and slammed his chest onto the mahogany table. Nathan thrashed, screaming obscenities, his pristine, tailored suit rumpling as the officers restrained him. Get him off me! He's lying! They paid him off! Nathan shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. Sitting in the gallery, Chloe had pressed herself as far back into the wooden bench as humanly possible, looking at the door as if calculating her chances of sprinting out without being arrested. Judge Harper stood up, her black robes billowing, her face a mask of absolute terrifying fury. Silence in my courtroom, she roared, pointing her gavel at Nathan like a weapon. Mr. Vance, you have not only attempted to weaponize this court to steal a child from a fit mother, but you have actively engaged in the subornation of perjury, bribery, and fraud. You are a disgrace. She turned her fiery gaze to the trembling doctor. Bailiff, take Dr. Evans into custody immediately. He will be held pending charges of perjury and fraud. I am forwarding this entire transcript to the district attorney's office and the state medical board. As the officers handcuffed the weeping doctor and dragged him out a side door, Judge Harper sat back down, picking up her pen. She didn't need to hear closing arguments. She didn't need to deliberate. The medical affidavit is entirely stricken from the record, she announced, her voice echoing with the finality of a falling axe. Given the shocking revelations of fraud, financial manipulation, and attempted perjury by the petitioner, this court finds Nathan Vance wholly unfit for legal or physical custody. I stopped breathing. I gripped the edge of my table, my nails digging into the polished wood. I am hereby granting immediate, sole physical, and legal custody of the minor child, Leo Vance, to the respondent, Maya Vance, Judge Harper declared, striking her gavel. Mr. Vance is granted 0 visitation rights pending the outcome of the criminal investigation into his actions today. This hearing is adjourned. Bang. The sound of the gavel hitting the sound block was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The invisible chains that had bound my chest for 5 agonizing months snapped. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I buried my face in my hands, and for the first time since the night of the crash, I wept freely. They weren't tears of pain. They were the hot, overwhelming tears of a mother who had just moved heaven, earth, and $12 million to save her child. David placed a warm, firm hand on my shoulder. We won, Maya. It's over. I wiped my face, looking up through my blurred vision. Across the room, the bailiffs were hauling a handcuffed Nathan to his feet. He looked back at me, his eyes wide, feral, and utterly broken. The smug Silicon Valley CEO was dead. He was just a criminal in an expensive suit. It's not over, I whispered, wiping the mascara from beneath my eyes and reaching for my cane, though I didn't truly need it. He still has a company, and I still have the foreclosure papers. 2 hours later, flanked by David and a uniformed police officer clutching the court order, I walked through the double doors of the brightly lit suburban daycare center. The smell of finger paints, graham crackers, and apple juice hit me like a physical wave. I scanned the room of chaotic, screaming children, and then I saw him. Leo was sitting in the corner on a blue beanbag chair wearing a little oversized sweater, quietly turning the pages of a dinosaur picture book. He looked taller, his hair was a little longer. Leo, I called out, my voice cracking perfectly down the middle. He looked up, his big brown eyes widened. He dropped the book. For a second, he just stared, trying to process if the woman standing there in the high heels was a dream. Mommy, he whispered. It's me, baby, I sobbed, dropping to my knees right there on the alphabet rug. I didn't care about the Louboutins. I didn't care about the titanium rods aching in my shins. Leo scrambled up and ran across the room as fast as his little legs could carry him. He slammed into my chest, wrapping his small, sticky arms around my neck, burying his face in my shoulder. I squeezed him so tightly I thought I might break him, inhaling the scent of his skin, feeling the rapid, fluttery beat of his little heart against mine. "You're walking, Mommy!" he cried, pulling back to look at me, his eyes shining with tears. "Daddy said your legs were broken forever. He said you couldn't come home." "Daddy was wrong," I whispered fiercely, kissing his forehead, his cheeks, his nose. "Mommy has metal legs now, like a superhero. And I am never, ever letting you go again." I carried him out of that daycare myself. I didn't use the cane. Every step I took with my son in my arms was a testament to the fire that Nathan had tried to extinguish. It took 3 days for the dust to settle on the custody ruling. We were now in the first week of February 2026. Leo was safely tucked away in the penthouse with a private nanny, happily playing with a mountain of new Legos. But my work wasn't finished. Nathan had made bail on the perjury charges, likely emptying whatever miserable dregs were left in his personal checking account, and was desperately trying to keep his sinking corporate ship afloat. It was a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 p.m. David and I stepped out of the private elevator on the 20th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise. This was the headquarters of Nathan's startup. The frosted glass doors bore the company logo, but the reception desk was empty. The phones were ringing, unanswered. The air smelled of stale coffee and panic. We walked past rows of empty cubicles. Employees were packing their personal belongings into cardboard boxes, whispering in hushed, terrified tones. They knew the money was gone. They knew payroll had bounced. At the end of the hallway was the main glass-walled boardroom. Inside, Nathan was pacing like a caged tiger. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, heavy dark bags hanging under his bloodshot eyes. Sitting around the long mahogany table were the 3 remaining members of his board of directors, wealthy, older men who looked incredibly displeased. And sitting in the corner, typing frantically on a laptop, was Chloe. She was trying to arrange her golden parachute, oblivious to the fact that I had already cut the cords. Nathan had called an emergency board meeting to address the default notices. He had begged the elusive Apex Holdings representative to attend in person, hoping to negotiate a restructuring of the debt or perhaps surrender equity to prevent an immediate asset lockout. He had no idea who he had invited into his house. David opened the heavy glass door. "Sorry we're late, gentlemen," David announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the tense room. "Traffic." Nathan froze mid-pace. He looked at David, and then his eyes landed on me. I stepped into the boardroom wearing a pristine white tailored suit, my expression carved from marble. "What the hell is this?" Nathan demanded, his voice trembling. He looked at his board members, then back at us. "Security, get her out of here. This is a private corporate meeting. You have no right to be here, Maya." "Actually, Nathan," I said smoothly, pulling out the chair at the absolute head of the table and sitting down. "I have every right to be here. In fact, it's the only chair in the room that officially belongs to me." The oldest board member, a venture capitalist named Harrison, frowned deeply. "Nathan, who is this woman? And where is the representative from Apex Holdings? We are on a very tight schedule before the bankruptcy courts close." I didn't let Nathan answer. I placed my black leather handbag on the table, unclasped it, and pulled out the thick, red foreclosure folder. I slid it right down the center of the polished mahogany wood. It stopped directly in front of Harrison. "My name is Maya Vance," I said, leaning back in my chair, steepling my fingers together. "I am the CEO, founder, and sole shareholder of Apex Holdings. And as of 8 a.m. last Friday, I own this company, its intellectual property, its servers, the chairs you are sitting on, and the coffee machine in the break room." The color drained from Harrison's face. The board members exchanged horrified, utterly bewildered glances. They had been kept in the dark about the personal warfare Nathan had waged. Chloe slammed her laptop shut. She stood up, her face twisted in a mask of panic and venom. "This is illegal. You can't just buy a company's debt to execute a personal vendetta." "It's called a hostile takeover, Chloe," David chimed in, leaning against the glass wall. "It's perfectly legal, highly effective, and in this particular case, incredibly satisfying." Nathan gripped the edge of the conference table. He looked like a man who had just been told he had 5 minutes to live. The reality of his situation, the sheer inescapable totality of my victory, finally crushed him. "Maya, please, Nathan whispered, the arrogance entirely stripped away, leaving only a hollow, pathetic shell. He didn't care that his board was watching. He didn't care about his pride anymore. He was begging. You took Leo. You won. I have nothing left. Please don't take the company. I built this. It's my life. You built this on a foundation of lies, Nathan, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, unforgiving whisper. You built this by abandoning your wife to a wheelchair to save $50,000. You built this by trying to steal your own son's future. I stood up, resting my hands on the table, leaning forward to look him dead in the eyes. I am not here to negotiate a restructure, I announced to the silent room. I am executing the foreclosure immediately. The corporate accounts are frozen. The servers will be taken offline in exactly 10 minutes. You have until the end of the day to clear out your personal items before the locks are changed. Nathan's legs gave out. He collapsed into a leather rolling chair, burying his face in his hands, letting out a jagged, wretched sob. The board members, realizing the ship was already at the bottom of the ocean, didn't argue. Harrison simply stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out without a backward glance, the other two men following close behind. They were abandoning him, just as he had abandoned me. But as the room emptied, leaving only me, David, the weeping Nathan, and Chloe, I turned my attention to the mistress. Chloe was inching toward the door, clutching her laptop to her chest, her eyes darting around like a trapped rat. She thought she was going to slip away in the chaos. She thought she could just hop on a flight to the Caymans and enjoy the millions she had stolen. Not so fast, Chloe, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. She froze, her hand hovering over the silver door handle. You have your company, Maya. You ruined him. I'm leaving. You aren't going anywhere. David stepped forward, blocking her path to the door. Except maybe federal prison. I walked around the table, the click of my heels sounding like a countdown. I stopped 2 feet in front of her. She tried to maintain her haughty, superior glare, but her lower lip was trembling violently. Did you really think I wouldn't audit the books when I bought the debt? I asked, a dark smile playing on my lips. Did you really think I wouldn't find the ghost consulting firm in Delaware? Or the offshore routing numbers? Nathan stopped crying. He lifted his head from his hands, his bloodshot eyes darting between me and Chloe, confusion piercing through his despair. What offshore accounts? I looked at Nathan, the final piece of the puzzle falling perfectly into place. I was about to give him the greatest gift of all, the truth about the woman he had destroyed his family for. What offshore accounts? Nathan repeated, his voice barely a hollow rasp. He slowly pushed himself up from the leather chair, staring at Chloe as if she had just morphed into a stranger right in front of him. I didn't break eye contact with her. I let the silence stretch, letting the terror fully saturate her features. The Cayman Islands, Nathan, I said, my voice smooth, casual, echoing off the glass walls of the boardroom. While you were maxing out your credit cards and taking out predatory loans against our family home to keep the servers running, your brilliant vice president of investor relations was quietly siphoning the cash. Over the last 8 months, she authorized hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake consulting fees to a ghost LLC in Delaware. From there, the money was wired directly into her private offshore accounts. Nathan's jaw went slack. The bloodshot exhaustion in his eyes was rapidly replaced by a wild, manic disbelief. He turned his entire body toward Chloe. Chloe? He whispered, taking a staggering step toward her. Is she lying? Tell me she's lying. We missed payroll. I put up my house. I put up Leo's college fund. Chloe backed away, her designer heels hitting the glass wall of the boardroom. There was nowhere left to run. The mask she had worn for a year, the supportive, brilliant, ride-or-die business partner, completely shattered. What was underneath was ugly, feral, and utterly self-serving. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She bared her teeth. "Oh, grow up, Nathan," Chloe shrieked, the venom in her voice making him flinch. "You think I was going to go down with this sinking ship? Your company was a joke from day one. You aren't a visionary. You're a mediocre salesman in a nice suit. The angel investors knew it, the board knew it, and I knew it. I just took my severance package early." The words hit Nathan with the physical force of a sledgehammer. The absolute certainty that he had destroyed his marriage, abandoned his injured wife, and committed multiple felonies for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than an easy mark finally broke his brain. He lunged at her. "You stole from me," Nathan roared, his hands reaching for her throat. "You ruined my life. I gave up my son for you." David Sterling moved faster than I thought possible for a man in a tailored suit. He stepped between them, shoving Nathan back by the chest with a heavy palm, sending him stumbling into the edge of the conference table. "Keep your hands to yourself, Nathan," David warned, his voice dangerously low. "Assaulting her will just add another charge to your indictment." Chloe sneered, smoothing the front of her cashmere sweater, her eyes flashing with malicious triumph. "That's right, Nate. Keep your hands off me. And you," she spat, turning her glare toward me. "You think you're so smart, Maya. You think you've won. But I have insurance." She held up her laptop, pressing it against her chest like a shield. "I recorded every single closed-door meeting in this office," Chloe declared, her voice trembling with a frantic, desperate arrogance. "I have audio of Nathan forging investor signatures on the Series A term sheets. I have emails where he directed me to lie to the IRS about our revenue projections. I'll hand it all over to the SEC. I'll cut an immunity deal, I'll testify against him, and I'll walk away without spending a single night in a cell." It was the ultimate betrayal, the final twist of the knife. She wasn't just abandoning him. She was actively feeding him to the wolves to save her own skin. Nathan slumped against the table, sliding down until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. He was making a low, keening sound, the sound of a man whose reality had been entirely dismantled. I looked at Chloe, watching her chest heave as she thought she had played her final trump card. "That is a brilliant strategy, Chloe," I said, offering her a cold, empty smile. "Truly. Flipping on your co-conspirator to secure a plea deal is standard procedure. There is just one tiny flaw in your plan." Her eyes narrowed. "What flaw?" "You can't cut a deal," David interjected, checking his Patek Philippe watch with a look of mild boredom, "when the authorities already have the entire puzzle." Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. They weren't local beat cops. They were 3 men and 1 woman wearing windbreakers bearing the bright yellow letters of the FBI, accompanied by 2 detectives from the NYPD's white-collar crime unit. They moved into the room with the heavy, inescapable authority of the federal government. Chloe's laptop slipped from her hands, crashing onto the hardwood floor. "Nathan Vance and Chloe Adams?" the lead FBI agent asked, his voice a gravelly bark that left absolutely no room for negotiation. Nathan didn't look up from the floor. Chloe just stared, her mouth opening and closing silently, the blood draining from her face until she looked like a corpse. "Nathan Vance," the detective continued, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and subornation of perjury. Chloe Adams, you are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion." "No." "Wait," Chloe stammered, stepping backward as the female agent approached her. "I have evidence. I have the drives. I can give you everything on him." "We already have it, Ms. Adams," the agent said, grabbing Chloe's wrist and spinning her around, snapping the cold steel around her wrist with a sharp click. "A very helpful anonymous holding company forwarded a comprehensive forensic audit to the Bureau 48 hours ago. We've already frozen the Cayman accounts. You don't have a dime to your name." Chloe let out a visceral, horrifying scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was the wail of a narcissist realizing her reflection had just been permanently shattered. She thrashed against the agents, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor, screaming obscenities at Nathan, at me, at the agents. They hauled Nathan up from the floor. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. His eyes were completely vacant, the spirit entirely drained from his body. As the detective cuffed him, Nathan slowly lifted his head and looked at me. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew there was none left in the universe for him. He just looked at my legs, at the sleek black Louboutins holding me tall and unshakable, and realized the monumental, catastrophic error he had made. He had mistaken my quiet sacrifices for weakness. He had mistaken a mother's love for a lack of ambition. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just watched them march him out the door. The glass doors swung shut, leaving David and me alone in the absolute silence of the empty boardroom. The heavy, metallic scent of fear lingered in the air, but beneath it, the room felt incredibly clean. The rot had been excised. David walked over to the mahogany table, picked up the red foreclosure folder, and slipped it back into his briefcase. "Well," David sighed, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips, "I'd say that concludes our business with the startup world. What's next for Apex Holdings, Madam CEO?" I looked around the glass walls, at the city stretching out beyond the windows. "Liquidate it all. Sell the servers, sell the IP, sell the office furniture. I don't want a single paperclip left to remind me of this place. I turned toward the door, feeling the familiar, grounding ache of the titanium in my legs. I have to go, David. I have a very important appointment. A meeting? David asked, raising an eyebrow. A date, I smiled, the first truly warm smile I had worn in 6 months. With my son. We have a Lego castle to finish. Mid-February 2026 arrived with a brilliant, blindingly clear sky. The brutal blizzards of January had passed, leaving behind a crisp, biting cold that made the air feel pure and sharp. I walked along the paved pathway of the park, the morning sun casting long, golden shadows across the snow-dusted grass. I was wearing a heavy cashmere coat and thick boots. I didn't need the cane. My stride was even, rhythmic, and strong. The dull ache in my shins was still there, a permanent resident in my bones, but I no longer viewed it as a curse. It was a badge of honor. It was the physical proof that I had been broken and had rebuilt myself stronger than steel. Ahead of me, bundled in a bright red puffer jacket and a thick wool beanie, Leo was running. "Mommy, look!" he shouted, his breath pluming in the freezing air like a little dragon. He pointed at a squirrel darting up the trunk of a massive oak tree. "I see it, baby," I called back, my chest expanding with a joy so profound it almost brought me to tears. I jogged a few steps to catch up with him, the impact on my legs sending a jolt up my spine, but I laughed through it. I scooped him up under his arms, spinning him around in the cold air until he shrieked with delight. The dust from the implosion of my past life had finally settled. Nathan was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, denied bail due to the severity of the flight risk and the sheer weight of the fraud charges. His trial was set for late summer, but his public defender had already advised him to take a plea deal for 7 to 10 years. He had nothing left to fight with. Chloe had managed to post a meager bail funded by a distant relative, but her life was unrecognizable. With her assets frozen by the FBI and the massive civil restitution judgments filed by Apex Holdings, she was entirely destitute. My private investigator sent me a single photograph last week. Chloe, wearing a stained polyester uniform, wiping down tables at a 24-hour diner in Queens. Her designer clothes were gone. Her arrogance was gone. She was trapped in the very life she had mocked me for living. I set Leo down on a park bench, pulling a thermos of hot cocoa from my tote bag and pouring a small cup for him. He wrapped his little mittened hands around it, blowing on the steam, his brown eyes bright and secure. He didn't know about the millions of dollars sitting in trust accounts for his future. He didn't know about the boardrooms, the offshore accounts, or the courtrooms. All he knew was that his mother was here, she was standing tall, and she was never going to leave him. I sat down next to him, wrapping my arm around his small shoulders, pulling him close against my side. I looked out over the frozen lake, the ice glittering like crushed diamonds under the morning sun. People often think that revenge is about destruction. They think it's about matching the cruelty of your enemies, lowering yourself into the dirt to tear them apart with your bare hands. But sitting there in the winter light, feeling the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of my son against my ribs, I knew the truth. True power doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to be cruel. It just needs to be relentless. I hadn't destroyed Nathan and Chloe. Their own greed, their own lies, and their own grotesque vanity had done that. I had simply bought the stage, turned on the floodlights, and let them perform their own execution. I kissed the top of Leo's wool beanie, closing my eyes, letting the absolute peace of the morning wash over my soul. The best revenge isn't destroying others. The best revenge is successfully protecting your child's world and proving that the woman they tried to bury was actually a seed. I opened my eyes, looking forward into a future that belonged entirely to us. "Come on, Leo," I smiled, standing up and taking his small, warm hand in mine. "Let's go home."